So another thing I've been looking at recently, I was watching another documentary on Netflix called "The Downfall," or the story of Boeing, and it talks about the Boeing 737 Max aircraft. And I just think it's really interesting. I do have another video on the YouTube site where I've actually given a whole presentation on corporate governance and decisions made for very commercial reasons that then lead to horrendous social consequences that weren't intended. And it occurs to me that we've got something similar that's happened here at Boeing, except maybe it's a little bit more nefarious. I don't know, I'd like to think that a lot of people have the best interests of the company at heart, but that's not necessarily the best interests of the community. And it's quite shocking when you think about, the commercial decisions made around, how much money would it cost us if more people died, or what's the likelihood of people dying, and if it did, how many would likely die, and if there was a crash and things like that. And the way that they weighed up the decision is quite callous. The Boeing 737 Max was out of service for a considerable period of time until they eventually introduced a fix, and I understand it's now got certification, it's back in the air, hopefully as safe as it ever should have been, and we certainly haven't heard much more about it, but certainly the behaviours that were exhibited by some of the Boeing executives, their president, their chairman, it just highlights everything that I spoke about in that particular presentation, where we talked about Exxon Valdez, we spoke about Challenger. All of these things, people come into work and they make business decisions. Now, I'm not saying that they're involved in fraud and things like that, but when you look at it from a forensic accounting point of view, very often forensics is not just about unpacking a fraud when it occurs, but it's looking at the culture of an organization and the behaviors, the decisions, the drivers behind those decisions, and whether they create an environment that could be unsafe or lead to unsafe decisions. And very often it's not about whether the decision is the right business decision or not, but in business there's also a degree of social license, a degree of social accountability. And many businesses make very legitimate business decisions that cross that line of social accountability, and it's very sad, and sometimes it can have tragic consequences, and no business wants that to happen. So the question then is, what are the frameworks, what are the accountabilities, and being able to recognize that when that happens. All too often you have influencers inside businesses who have their own particular agenda, and it might be that that agenda drives things that are in the interests of that particular influencer. The lesson or the caution is sometimes not to be too influenced by influencers. Influencers can be good in businesses, that they can get culture out there, they can get messaging out there and things like that, and that's great. But you've got to remember they also have their own objectives. And so people make decisions in businesses for a range of reasons, many of them very legitimate. Sometimes they also indulge, though, in where there are mistakes. There's a little bit of covering you behind that slips in there as well, and you've got to remember that there are consequences, or inconsequential, or not inconsequential, it's the word I'm looking for. There are unexpected consequences of some of the decisions that are made, and that doesn't make them bad, doesn't make the people behind them bad, always, sometimes, but businesses should look to have better controls, and they should look to understand decisions that no one person can drive and influence to that degree that that you can influence the whole course of a decision or of an organization in that particular way. So, you had situations where you had the president, who was also the chairman of the company. In the case of Boeing, no one's going to question him. Having those kind of roles separated is actually a good thing sometimes, because then you've got the person who's the CEO or the president, you've got the chairperson who can actually go, hang on a second, I'm not sure that's the right call. But it's just an interesting documentary. Take a look at it if you like. It's a bit shocking in terms of the behavior. You wouldn't expect that from a company like Boeing. It talks to the changing culture when McDonnell Douglas and Boeing merged, which is quite interesting. I didn't know about that before. But have a think about it. If you watch the documentary, have a think about how corporate culture can allow or drive decision making that leads to significant unintended social consequences.